This segment of the Chopin podcast is brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States, dedicated to promoting young American pianists and making Chopin's music accessible to all. Chopin's waltzes are paradoxical things. On the one hand, they're pop music, rather outdated since last time I checked, waltzing is no longer in vogue among the European public. But on the other hand, they're capital A art, designed with such a high degree of formal integrity that they've stood the test of time. Chopin himself even found this mix of high and low culture rather puzzling when it came to the waltz. Writing to his former teacher after moving to Paris, quote, "They call waltzes artworks here." Well, he went on to embrace this paradox with spectacular results. Few composers in history have ever elevated a popular genre as high as Chopin did in his own waltzes for piano. And few pianists in recent memory have managed to capture the charm and craftsmanship of this music like Stephen Hough, whose 2011 Hyperion recording of the complete cycle of Chopin waltzes was released as an LP this past fall. I was fortunate to catch up with Stephen on a recent video call where we listened to some of his waltzes together, sparking a wide-ranging conversation on Chopin and his enduring appeal amid constant social and technological change. Well, Stephen, I'm holding a very handsome album here, this LP. It's the complete Chopin Waltzes, played by you and published by the Hyperion label. And I guess my first question is just simply, how did this record come to be?
Well, the LP is very recent, but the recording was done, 12 years ago, I think, or something like that. Well, I've recorded quite a lot of Chopin for Hyperion, the two piano sonatas, the ballades, the scherzos, the nocturnes. And they're the waltzes, and I wanted to record them. I've played a number of them in concert, and many I barely knew when I started this project. And of course, it's a very nice, tight CD length of music.
Do most of your Hyperion CDs also come out as LPs or as records, or is this a special case?
Well, they just brought five different artists, 5 different LPs. I don't think they're going to bring everything out. I know they're not. The market for LPs is very specific. It's quite lively at the moment, but it's one of those things trends that could suddenly nosedive, and nobody's interested in vinyl anymore. Maybe they come back to CDs, you know. I'm a little puzzled by the vinyl craze, not least because the machines most people are playing on them on are so poor. And I'm old enough to remember when vinyl was all there was, and people were very fussy about their turntables and their speakers and their amplifiers. And, you know, you were talking the price of a small house to get the best equipment to listen to all of this on. So when I was in a LP store in Seoul, Korea, and people were getting terribly excited about the warmth of the sound of these vinyls, and the machines were something that, you know, you'd carry to a picnic or something. So I'm happy for anything that interests people in classical music and in piano music. I'm not sure how long the fad will last, but while it's there, they certainly look lovely, don't they? The full, big cardboard pictures, if they have an interesting cover.
Well, I think that's part of it. There's a kind of nostalgia for an earlier age, even if our machines are kind of crap, like mine, to be honest. But I grew up with cassette tapes and CDs, and so I don't even have that experience from being younger. And yet there's something about this, you know, large. For me, it just looks like a large CD sleeve. But also the liner notes. I think there's a tradition of, I think, often young pianists and musicians interested in pursuing a career, often they learn about music first by getting LP records and reading the jacket cover. I wonder if there's wonderful notes on yours written by Jeffrey Kahlberg. And I wonder, do you have memories from being a kid and just sort of, I don't know, collecting LPs or reading the backs of them and kind of learning about music, or was that not part of your experience?
Oh, totally, Ben. Yeah, I very much so. And in fact, I can remember there was one record called Keyboard Giants of the Past, which is a very important record for me It was bought for me by my parents when I was probably 7 years old, and it actually shaped the whole way since that I've thought of what great piano playing is. Because these people, Cortot and Pachman and Paderewski and Rachmaninoff and so on, became my pianistic heroes.
This is Joseph Levine performing Schultz Evler's transcription of Strauss's Blue Danube Waltz.
And on the back were all these little comments by Abram Chasins, who wrote those notes, of course, very famous teacher and pianist himself. And I think you read these notes every time you pick up the record in a way you don't with a CD.
Yeah.
With a CD, you take out the liner booklet, and however interesting it's
too small.
It's too small. You have to physically to take it out. With this, when you take the LP off the shelf, you are faced with the notes. They are right there in front of you every single time. A little bit like the difference between reading a book on a Kindle or reading it in the flesh or in the paper. I've read books, particularly novels, and I've forgotten what the title is because I've only been reading them on the Kindle and I never see the title. Whereas with the old books, of course, you saw the title every time you took it out from the shelf.
I want to actually just read a quote from the liner notes. Jeffrey Kahlberg writes that for the young and youthful of Chopin's day, waltzing meant fun, not least for the close embrace and penetrating eye contact it permitted the whirling, dancing couple. I think I hear, I mean, obviously it's embodied in the music, but especially in your performances, I hear the whirling, dancing couples. For example, just in Opus 18, something about the sweep with which you play. I really feel this sense of dance, and I'm wondering if you had any sort of ballroom scenes in mind, when you're actually playing something like this or recording these things, or if you just kind of feel it, because they really conjure up pictures, I think, in our heads of these kinds of elegant and playful and sometimes mischievous kinds of scenes.
Yes, well, I think most music is dance music on one level. I think rhythm and dancing, human beings began singing and dancing. That's the beginning of music I think in all cultures, and in some cultures it remains. We've sort of lost it a bit in the West, but my grandmother's generation, people would still go to dances. They'd dance in the village square. They'd dance at weddings and sing, and they'd sing in the shower, or they'd sing at church, or and we've lost some of that. And I think that these waltzes are very much songs and dances. You see that element in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I also, this goes back to the piano. I'm always looking for a piano which will be airborne, an action which doesn't bog me down, that lets me fly. And I think this music flies, doesn't it? You're talking about Opus 18, but also the other A flat, the two A flat waltzes. They both have this figuration. In fact, they share a figuration, quite rare for Chopin.
Yeah, you could just break into one or the other right there. You could just. There's not a lot of interchangeable passages in Chopin, but those are.
Yeah, and Chopin really never repeats himself, but there he sort of almost does. It does go in a slightly different direction. But if that isn't flying off the page, flying off the keyboard, I don't know what is. And so this was all what I wanted to find in recording these waltzes, is getting that lightness, that there's never a feeling that everything's on the ground. When you're dancing, your feet are off the ground as much as they're on the ground. We can't fly yet as human beings, but we can at least come off the ground before we return to it. And I feel with these pieces, it's more off the ground than it is on the ground. And the shoes Chopin is wearing are very light. They're not boots. These are very light pumps that you might wear to dance with.
Are you a dancer yourself?
No. Absolutely not. I did learn how to waltz when I was a teenager because my father was a Freemason and a Grand Master of the Lodge, and there was a ladies' night once a year, and we went. I used to find this very exciting, actually, and we'd go along when wives and so on could go and children, and I learned how to dance the waltz, but I was even then very, very bad.
Yeah, it's funny to me that I mean, I was so captured by the waltzes. Actually, it was from this Rubinstein box when I was 13 years old. I had nothing to do with early 19th century French waltz craze or European waltz craze. I had nothing to do with this culture, and yet I felt this direct affinity and emotional connection with how Chopin at least embodies it. Do you ever think about that? I mean, it's 200 years old. I mean, this is basically defunct culture, and yet through this music we're somehow transported to these times, and we can feel something of what they were feeling, even if it's not part of our own daily lives.
Yeah, well, emotions are not defunct. Human beings share those across the generations and the centuries. And what that's to me one of the greatest treasures about our classical music is the time span. I mean, even for the most sophisticated popular music, it lasts maybe a decade, or well, the Beatles, I suppose, have been 5 decades, but that's really unusual. But we're talking, as you say, 200 years, and yet it's totally. I feel Chopin's as contemporary as anything that I deal with in the contemporary world. I mean, he's more in fashion than the iPhone 6 is, which is really a relic, from another time. And so Chopin is a constant fascination for me because of what you were saying about this connection. I think of all the great composers, he's the most consistently inspired. He really didn't write bad music. Now, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, Schubert, there are pieces that are weak in their canons, really, if we're being honest about it, or at least that are significantly less inspired than others. But I really feel with Chopin, the consistency is astonishing. Having said that, one would have to say probably that as a body of work, the waltzes are the least inspired. If you're talking about the preludes, the ballades, the berserkers, and so on, you get the feeling that they were written with a lighter touch, that then they don't aim to go deep and dark.
Mhm.
Maybe the third waltz gets close, but on the whole, their music probably written for the salon, written for the domestic
Mhm.
market. Chopin was always someone interested in making money, selling pieces to different publishers and hoping to hoodwink one and get paid twice for the same piece and so on. That was part of his way of living. And I think this was music that he wrote very much hoping it would sell a lot of copies to people because on the surface it's more straightforward to play certainly than the etudes or the ballades.
Yeah, well, there's almost a contradiction between the fleeting, fashionable nature of this 19th century waltz fad and the work of art made for posterity. And Chopin sort of splits the difference here. He's able to capture something of his time, but he was such a craftsman that he fashioned them in such a way, and again they speak to a 13-year-old boy from Austin, Texas, in 2000, right? So, and Kahlberg speaks to this. So do you think that craftsmanship element is what elevates something above the level of a temporary kind of fad and allows it to speak across generations?
Oh, totally. I mean, that fastidiousness of Chopin, you see it very clearly as an example in the Berceuse, don't you? Because, it's basically exactly the same accompaniment in the left hand every bar, except it changes from a C to an E flat depending on what's going on above.
Yeah.
Chopin never get that wrong. He was a craftsman of the absolute highest skill. And that's really why I felt the piano was so important for this, because the left hand, which in most of these waltzes is kind of an cha-cha the
Mhm.
whole way through. But it's never just that with Chopin. And in fact, I remember one of my teachers saying to me once, he said, many people can play wonderful right hands in the Chopin etudes, but the great performances of the Chopin etudes are the left hand, which
Mm.
is not technically particularly hard, but that's where the craftsmanship goes on. And as with pianists, so with composers and so with Chopin, it's that internal craftsmanship. It's that suit that is beautifully stitched. You don't even see the stitching sometimes, but it's why it looks so good. And I think that's why it sounds so good with Chopin. He never gives you an ugly chord, a badly balanced chord. It's always
Yeah.
perfectly shaped.
It's not just dance that we hear. I mean, these waltzes aren't just portraying the background music of a dance scene. They're also portraying the people. I feel like they depict the emotions and characters of those involved in a little plot or drama. And sometimes those characters are, like I said, mischievous. There's some sinister laughter in the first waltz. I thought I would share your version of this laughter because I find it very amusing and funny. Do you feel this human, almost like film-like character aspect and interplay with somebody like that? Is that a new person who's entered the scene and sort of mixed things up, or how do you sort of imagine that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've got a sort of word for it. It's a very strange moment, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
um, and I think that's what's interesting with these waltzes is that every one of them has a moment of tenderness or a moment of sadness or of sort of sudden joy, even though that they don't plumb the depths like the mazurkas, which is the
Mhm.
closest equivalent because they're also dances in three. But whereas the mazurkas are deeply private, they're deeply patriotic, of course, and they go sort of into a sort of psyche of a whole nation and of a whole lifetime. With the waltzes, they're more public pieces. You feel that they
Mhm.
were written, the scenes that he's conjuring up are in public. So you mentioned about people dancing arm in arm and looking each other in the eye. They're not up to anything that they're ashamed of doing in front of everyone else.
Right.
The mazurkas are solitary often. I don't sense, well, some of them, of course, are village dancers and some, especially some of the earlier ones,
Mhm.
but he really finds a way with those to tell extraordinarily psychologically complex stories. And you
Yeah.
don't get that in the waltzes.
Yeah.
But
The mazurkas are like diaries. Yeah.
yeah, I think that is his sort of personal
Yeah.
diary, isn't
Yeah.
the mazurkas. And it covers the same lifespan, if you think, because there are mazurkas and waltzes from the very earliest juvenilia right through to the end of his mature life. So they're both diaries, but one is maybe a guest book that everyone can see, and the other one is a secret diary that he's locked and kept in a drawer.
Speaking of some of these tender moments, there's one just in the passage that follows what I just played, and I want you to pay attention specifically to what you do here with the waltz rhythm, the left hand timing, and talk a little bit about that. We've been just sort of going full steam ahead until that point, just about in this waltz. Can you talk about this kind of breaking of the stricter three triple meter and exploring this other side to the waltz, this nuance of the waltz rhythm?
Yeah, well, we spoke earlier about song and dance. And we've heard the dance before, and now this is a moment of song. And of course, it's a moment absolutely placed in the perfect register of a coloratura soprano. And so I feel what happens is before the left hand was playing with the dance, with the dancers, now the left hand is accompanying the singer. So I sort of, I think, and this Chopin spoke about this, didn't he, in a very specific way of how the right hand or the vocal line um, should be free and the left hand keep the time, sort of. And I think that's an example of what's happening here. It's not exactly keeping the time, but you're splitting your personality so that the right hand becomes the diva and the left hand is supporting the diva,
Mhm.
is the collo voce. It's kind of listening, waiting, and going with it. And so you're playing two roles at the same time. And that's true as tempo rubato, I think, in a lot of Chopin. And I'm working right now on the third sonata, which I'm playing at the moment, and there are moments. The second subject of the first movement is a perfect example of that. The left hand is spinning this sort of arpeggio, and the right hand is the singer. what you don't want to happen is for both of them to be aligned so much that they're both being divas at the same time, like
Right.
sort of. And it's a very important thing because I think that this rubato need, and this is why you can't play the hands together when you're playing Chopin. I don't think.
Mhm.
I don't mean in a Paderewski way where every single thing is split up. But if one hand is playing the accompaniment and the other hand is free,
Mhm.
psychologically couldn't be so much that they're always aligned on every single note. And I think that's why the style of playing that ended in around the 1950s was the right one that stretches right back to Chopin, because if he talks about these hands not being one keeping time, one being free, they're not going to be playing together.
Right, and the left hand doesn't have to be metronomic time. It can be like what you just played, which there's a kind of give and take, a push and pull in the left hand, but then it still comes back and returns to the pulse where you would expect it to. So it's a matter of, I guess, regularity or predictability of the left hand. And then on top of the right hand is a singer or some kind of free independent instrument. And there's a beautiful moment also in that melancholic A minor waltz, one of my favorite moments probably in all the waltzes, and you just play it gloriously. So I have to share just a second of it with you. But here there, you lengthen the first beat of the left hand in a really specific way that I appreciate. There's the cello.
Yeah.
Okay, starting here. That might be more private and mazurka-like, isn't it?
Very much. In fact, it almost is like a mazurka.
Yeah.
But I think, well, also what I'm doing there, with that C and the A, where it goes from the major of the same into the minor. If you play, and this is something Horowitz did so much, was you play the right hand imperceptibly before the left, which is the opposite of what the Paderewski thing is. It gives a sense of yearning, and the ear, because the ear hears the melody and then hears the harmony, but we're talking a fifth of a second. It's so small you almost can't measure it. But I think if you listened, at some point again, you would hear that C does come very, very, very slightly before the A. And this is all part of how this works with creating singing, in a sense. There's no singing on the piano, literally. Everything is fakery in the most wonderful way, and that's what pianists are all about. We're all fakes. We're all trying to produce what it's like to hear a coloratura soprano in this repertoire with our hammers hitting the strings.
There's a moment in the Opus 34 number 1, that first big A flat waltz, right before the coda, where you do something that is Joseph Hoffman-esque. I think it's surprising. I mean, you get to a climax point, but then you sort of almost decrescendo the climax right where we would least expect it, and then you yank us into the coda with an accented note. This is the kind of thing I just don't hear this kind of piano playing very often, unless it's on an old Hoffman record. Let me just play you this moment and see if I'll show you what I'm talking about. I know it was brief, but do you know what I'm talking about? There's this kind of playful tugging into a new section, or surprising us with a kind of negative crescendo. I don't know if you find that particularly exemplary of that, but could you speak to that influence on you? I can tell that you have an influence. You've spoken about it and written about it, of this golden age era.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, this record got Keyboard Giants of the Past with the big LP cover and Abraham Chasins on the back. I mean, I grew up listening to that playing and not realizing there was anything else, really. So in a way, it started me off. And so maybe sometimes it's the opposite way around, and we hear only contemporaries, and then someone will say, oh, listen to this Cortot recording, and then it's something new. For me, it was something new to hear Ashkenazi, because I was kind of used to to an older style of playing. And I like all kind. I think, Richter is a pianist. I don't feel a close affinity with his playing, in that I don't feel when he plays, yes, that's what I would like to do, but I can stand and admire hugely. And I think
Mhm.
he's just an incredible artist, even though I don't feel a compatibility with him. And that can happen in many different parts of life. And thank goodness, I think, it's wonderful when we can disagree and still treasure. And I wish we had more of that in life, politically, socially, and in every other kind of way. But but that's, at least let's stick to music. But I think some of that example is the vocal thing. When you take a big breath and start to sing, your voice is going to have more juice at the beginning of the line than it is as you run out of breath. And that's really the origin of this, the Russian crescendo, I think, was what Joseph Levine referred to it, where you begin and go away. Even
Mhm.
though the phrase may be pointing forward, you're actually coming away because you've run out of breath. It's a very natural thing. And I think in Chopin, we should never forget that it was the opera singers he loved, not the instrumentalists. Those were his heroes and heroines. So
Mhm.
that's very much part of this whole world, and this separation of accompanist and singer. I was just thinking of an example of the opening of, well, there's so many in Chopin, but the opening of the Andante Spianato. I've taught this in masterclasses, and people try to make those opening bars when there's nothing going on in the right hand very beautiful and very expressive, but actually they should be incredibly plain. I mean, very even and beautifully voiced, but they're not full of person. They're the accompanist. The accompanist paid $10 an hour, and then the diva comes on with the melody from the B natural, and she's $20,000 an hour. And it's the problem is, if everything's on the same page, then nothing's on any page.
Yeah.
Distinction. It's like the fourth ballade. The opening bars are very difficult to bring off somehow. I think partly because people try to do too much with them. The piece
Mhm.
starts with the tune on line 3, middle of the line, not with a dum 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 dum. That's just. It's kind of just creating a color. It's the accompanist beginning, improvising a few bars. What are we going to do? The singer getting ready to sing, and then ending, and there's a pause, and then you come in with that melody that, with the D flat, we know this piece is going to be tragic.
Right. Not everything needs to be interpreted in that sense. And there's also, mechanical is a dirty word in piano pedagogy, but sometimes it's nice to have a machine-like or mechanical-like figuration, like the beginning of Andante Spianato, like you say, still voiced nicely, but something that can then help distinguish the human element that's about to come in. So, and of course, this was written in the time of the Industrial Revolution, when it was paramount to distinguish the human from the machine, and the ways those things are actually portrayed in art is beautiful. And if we give everything a human kind of gestural breathiness, then it's kind of like it's sickening, on some level.
Yeah. I think this feeling of trying to show what a great musician you are in every second you're on stage is a very dangerous thing. Well, when it's self-conscious.
Mhm.
And I feel it's a lot of what's got into competition playing. And understandably, you have 15 minutes to show the jury what you can do. And we all want to be thought of as great musicians. I mean, the worst thing you can say to someone is you're a bad musician. Well, I don't think being a great musician is showing everything every single bar. There are
Right.
times you need to let something go and not do anything, so that when you really have something to say, it makes a point. And I think this is true in all of art. It's true in opera. In Wagner, for instance, if every single moment were like the immolation scene, it would be unbearable. There's a lot of kind of rather padding, telling the story in Wagner, and because of that, when the big moments come, they're even more astonishing. And on a smaller scale, that's true even in a Chopin prelude. That it's not every single bar, like look at me, look at me. I think we need to get away from this kind of self-consciousness, I think, sometimes, and allow something to be very simple.
It's also true in the world of theater. It's called overacting. When you give
Yes.
every single when you give every single line from the script or word that you say some kind of importance that it doesn't need.
Yeah.
right? So I have one more example from you then, and then I'll let you go. This is from the great C sharp minor waltz. Well, great, at least it's very popular. It's not the greatest waltz, but it's one of the most played and most fun, and it's very repetitious, perhaps. I don't want to slander it. It calls for the performer to come up with some way of, returning to this ritornello, this spinning figuration, and finding variety in it, finding detail in it. And you do something that both harkens back to, I think something that I heard the old recordings. Rachmaninoff is the first to bring out this thumb line, or at least the first one I've ever heard to do it in his recording on the C sharp minor waltz. But you do that in the very last iteration of this. But then in the final repetition, you bring out a top voice that I didn't even know was there. And I don't even know if you remember doing this, but I'm going to play it for you now because it's so delicious and a wonderful way to end. So I just want to say thank you for doing that.
It's a little naughty. Yeah. I think there's always, Tchaikovsky is a pianist that I knew a little bit and loved very much. And he would sometimes do these things. I think inner voices, well, they can be overdone, of course, and you never want them to seem like a caricature. But the piano is the ultimate contrapuntal instrument, and if we don't have counterpoint on it, there's almost no point in having it. That's where that's its great selling point. Its unique quality is being able to do this, and certainly Chopin even marks some of these inner voices in his music. He'll have notes held on. I'm thinking of the D flat nocturne. There's a moment when he holds on a middle voice. If he's actually written that one out, you can be sure that he's done it 100 times when he hasn't actually written it out, because it's obviously a way of thinking that the accompaniment has counterpoint as well. It has movement within and melody within.
This episode is brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States. Established by Lady Blanca Rosenstiel in 1977, the foundation has championed the music of Chopin and helped launch the careers of countless young American pianists for nearly a half century. To support the Chopin Foundation, visit chopin.org/donate. If you enjoyed this interview, consider joining my Patreon, where paying members have access to bonus scenes from my interview with Stephen Hough and other Chopin podcast guests.